In 1957, the Singapore Citizenship Ordinance was passed. We can see that the ordinance was a milestone in Singapore's nation-building history as it created the legal status of Singapore citizen that didn't exist before. It was a key marker of Singapore's transition from British colony to autonomous self-governing state.
Hi, my name is Shabir and this is the Library Report, a series where we talk to interesting people, explore exciting spaces and unearth compelling stories. Have you ever thought about the different laws that govern Singapore and how they came to be? Today, I'll be taking a behind-the-scenes look at how the team at the National Archives draw on the rich collection of our nation's history for an exhibition at the National Gallery titled Laws of Our Land, Foundations of a New Nation. I'll be exploring some of the laws put in place that have made Singapore the country it is today. Let's go! Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining me. Before we dive into the Laws of Our Land exhibition, tell me a little bit more about the team and what you guys do.
I'm Fiona from the Records Management Department. So on a day-to-day, I advise agencies on how to manage their records. Once they're being transferred to the National Archives of Singapore, I'm also responsible for the planning of the collection management. For this particular exhibition, I've been working primarily on the Women's Charter section.
I'm Kevin, Senior Archivist at the Oral History Centre. I administer the records in the centre and also study their contents. And for the exhibition, I focused on the Citizenship Ordinance section.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a Senior Specialist at the Oral History Centre. In my day-to-day, I am involved in planning and then implementing oral history projects, from creating the questions to training the interviewers to carrying out the interviews. For this exhibition, I was involved in the Employment Act and the whole history of labour laws that came before that.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the Laws of Our Land exhibition?
The exhibition is a sequel to the Laws of the Land exhibition on Singapore's constitutional history from colonial times to the modern day. Both exhibitions are located at the historic Chief Justice's Chambers and Office at National Gallery, Singapore. This is a very important historic venue because it was the home of the Chief Justice, who was the defender of the Constitution. For the Laws of Our Land exhibition, we covered 3 landmark laws: the Citizenship Ordinance, the Women's Charter, and the Employment Act. And these laws cover our everyday lives as people in Singapore.
And through this exhibition, we are able to explore the histories of why these laws were being passed. So that gave us a chance to look into the collections of the National Library and National Archives and bring out a range of documents ranging from government records to personal documents that showcase the historical context behind what are the practices that these laws attempted to address.
So besides the physical documents that you will be encountering within the space, I think what we wanted to do was incorporate a more layered experience for the audience. So we've actually included multimedia elements, moving images, oral history recordings, projections, and one special element is augmented reality, where you can actually scan, a code and then interact with a character within these 3 different sections.
That sounds really exciting. I'd like to know from each of you more about the legislations and how it features in the exhibition. Kevin, you focused on the Citizenship Ordinance for the exhibition, which ties in with our identities as Singaporeans. Could you tell us what was uncovered through your research and the exhibition?
Through the exhibits, we explore how political identity was understood even before the modern conception of Singaporean. So under British colonial rule, many people who lived in Singapore were migrants who came here to do work and to do business. And then there's the India Act 30, which was passed in 1852, which indicated that some people in Singapore could be naturalised as British if they met certain criteria, for instance, if they're persons of standing in their community and the British administration. And some of the earliest people to be naturalised were the business and community leaders of the different ethnic groups in Singapore. We can see this from our Strait Settlements records, including one which we display in the exhibition. In 1858, the British also introduced their nationality law to Singapore, whereby nationality was determined solely by place of birth. And it stated if someone was born in British territories like Singapore, they would automatically become a British subject regardless of their ethnicity. And this laid the seeds and the framework for the multiculturalism we have in Singapore today.
How does the Citizenship Ordinance of 1957 come into the picture?
So what happened was that after the war, the British had decided to gradually pull back from empire, and they began preparing Malaya, including Singapore, for self-government. Singapore's British subjects were actually progressively granted citizenship rights by Britain, and this took the form of political rights, including the right to vote for legislators in Singapore. The British eventually decided to give Singapore self-government and establish Singapore citizenship. In 1957, the Singapore Citizenship Ordinance was passed. We can see that the ordinance was a milestone in Singapore's nation-building history, as it created the legal status of Singapore citizen that didn't exist before. It was a key marker of Singapore's transition from British colony to autonomous self-governing state. According to the ordinance, all residents born in Singapore or the Federation of Malaya, as well as British citizens with 2 years residence, were eligible for citizenship. It also stated that migrants with 8 out of 12 years residence could also apply for naturalization. At the exhibition, you will see the impact of the Citizenship Ordinance. It included Singapore's approach to citizenship rooted in multiculturalism and respect for cultural diversity. It showcases pivotal moments such as the 1959 general election, marking citizens' first vote for a fully elected government, and the 1962 merger referendum. Additionally, it illustrates Singaporeans' commitment to national defence, exemplifying their core duty as citizens and defenders of the nation.
Fiona, your research focused on the Women's Charter. Can you tell us more about how it features in the exhibition?
So one of the 3 laws that we feature in the exhibition is the Women's Charter, and in that particular section we look at some of the historical practices that it seeks to address, as well as the significance of being passed in 1961. So in 1950s post-war Singapore, there was a movement towards introducing a monogamous marriage bill because that would help to sort of protect vulnerable women who were in polygamous marriages, and that was led very much in the forefront by women's groups and their leaders such as Mrs. Shirin Fozdar, Mrs. Seow Pek Ling, the People's Actions Party Women's League, as well as Mrs. Muhammad Siraj. So these women sort of led the public debates in terms of what kinds of legislation that should be put in place in order to protect women in marriages. And eventually that became the Women's Charter that was eventually passed in 1961. It also incorporated other kinds of legislations that was aimed at protecting girls and women. Under this larger umbrella of the Women's Charter, it signified the new nation's commitment towards gender equality.
What were some of the practices the Women's Charter aimed to tackle?
So polygamy was one of such practices because it left women in a vulnerable state when it comes to matters of inheritance, as well as who was responsible for the running of the matrimonial household. With the passing of the Women's Charter in 1961, it made the registration of marriages mandatory. In the colonial period, there were certain sort of laws that were targeted towards that. So there was the Christian marriage law, there was the civil marriage law, as well as the Muslim marriage laws, but it wasn't mandatory for them to do the registration. So it was not until the passing of the Women's Charter, as well as the Administration of Muslim Law Act, that made a registration of such marriages mandatory. In addition to that, the Women's Charter also incorporated other laws that were targeted towards the protection of girls and women. So another one of these colonial practices that were unfavorable to girls and women was this practice of Muay Thai. So this roughly translates to little girl in Cantonese. And this practice was that of hiring young girls as young as 8 years old to serve as domestic labour within the household. And in 1932, the colonial authorities attempted to try to regulate this practice by passing what is known as the Muay Thai Ordinance, and with that, they stipulated certain basic protections that should be offered to these young girls. What we are going to display at the exhibition includes a little identity card of one of these Muay Thais in 1932, and it showcases some of the general regulations, such as their basic salary, in what situations the employers need to report to the Chinese Protectorate. And ultimately, what the 1961 Women's Charter did was to sort of take in all these various preceding laws and sort of take it under its umbrella as this new Women's Charter.
What was the significance of the Women's Charter?
So back when it was first mooted as an idea, there was a lot of public debate about whether it went far enough to protect women's rights, or perhaps it went too far and started to undermine local customary practices. And we try to feature parts of these debates through the oral history interviews with people who are on both sides of the debate, as well as the recordings from the Legislative Assembly debates, and also feature excerpts from the 2 select committees that were responsible for gathering public feedback about this law before it was officially passed. So the Women's Charter continues to evolve today, reflecting the many changing societal norms. Each time it is being amended, parliamentarians never cease to sort of reference its historical symbolism in terms of defending gender equality.
The Employment Act is a crucial part of the lives of working Singaporeans, but how did we get to where we are today?
Well, the Employment Act is really the story about work and labour in Singapore. As many of us learned in schools, the British East India Company set up a trading post in Singapore in 1819. And when this happened, the economy actually picked up. A lot of trading was done, a lot of work was available. This attracted many migrant workers from around the region to Singapore. So many of these workers came to Singapore as indentured labourers. What this meant is that there were agents in their home country recruiting these workers, and then they would actually bring them by ship here and then pay for their lodging, pay for their food as well. So this meant that they started their journey in debt. And they were bound by these contracts. And when they came to Singapore, they had to work very harsh conditions, long hours, low pay. But some of them actually had deceptive terms in their work contracts. Some of them also faced violence and abuse. So in our exhibition, what we wanted to try to do was to highlight how the laws were passed by the authorities to regulate and protect the labourers. So over time, laws are actually being passed to protect these immigrant workers. And the early laws were actually specific to the different ethnic communities. For example, in 1876, there was the Indian Immigrants Protection Ordinance, where they made sure that the Indian immigrants that came to Singapore were actually below the age of 45 and that they were healthy. And then the next year, in 1877, there was the Chinese Immigrants Ordinance. And this actually ensured that the ships that were coming from China only reported to specific ports, and they were screened to make sure that the workers actually were not deceived into coming to Singapore. So while the authorities were passing laws, there were also movements on the ground. There were clan associations, there were workers' guilds being organized to protect workers. Now, with the passing of the Trade Unions Act in 1940, what we actually saw is an attempt by the authorities to inculcate better relationships between employers and employees. And so this trade union movement actually gained momentum after the Second World War, when trade unions started sprouting, and you actually saw that they were very active in both advocating for political causes as well as for workers' rights.
So how did the Employment Act that we know today come to be?
The Employment Act that we know today is actually the revised edition from 2020, and it's based off the 1968 Employment Act, which we're featuring in our exhibition. Now, it's important to understand the circumstances where the Act came into being. So at that point in time, there were three important points. First of all, the militant trade unions were actually very disruptive to society and the economy. Second point is that the British actually were withdrawing their military forces from Singapore, which would be leading to a lot of loss of jobs, both directly and indirectly in Singapore. And thirdly, the Singapore government was embarking on its plans to industrialize the economy. And so because it had to attract foreign direct investments to Singapore, we had to make sure that the climate here was peaceful and conducive to work. As a result of that, the Employment Act was passed, and it really sought to harmonize and balance the relationships between employers and employees. On the one hand, it helped to standardize certain work conditions, like the work hours, public holidays, while on the other hand, it also made sure that employers were protected from excessive overtime claims. Now, despite criticism at that point in time, the Employment Act was largely successful in inculcating industrial harmony and engendering economic growth in Singapore.
I learned so much about the laws and how they became what they are today. Could you share a little bit more about the challenges that you faced during the research process?
Because these laws sort of address a very wide range of different kinds of historical contexts and practices, it was sometimes a challenge for us to select what would best tell the stories and these histories. But on the other hand, that gave us a chance to go into the collections of the National Archives and National Library and to bring out a wide range of displays for the public to see, ranging from government marriage registers to personal documents. Also look at different ways in which we can present these stories, such as through our interactives.
I guess to add on to what Fiona said, one of the challenges is that when we deal with archival records, usually we get them from government sources and authoritative sources. But what we also wanted to make sure that we included in the exhibition were the accounts, the personal accounts from people on the ground, which helped to give insight into the conditions, as well as how the laws will impact them.
What are you hoping visitors can take away after visiting the exhibition?
I think one of the key takeaways is that we hope that visitors come away with a deeper appreciation of the laws of Singapore and of Singapore's legal history. And this is an aspect of Singapore history that relatively few people are familiar with. And we also want visitors to come away with appreciation that Singapore's laws have this underlying aspiration of justice and are crafted for the benefit of society.
All right, that was a really insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your sharing. If you want a better understanding of these laws, do visit the Laws of Our Land exhibition at the National Gallery. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Library Report. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for updates when we upload a new video.